Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Future Space. I'm your host, Daniel Fox. Our guest today is Michael Moreno. Michael is the Principal Business Development Manager, VC and Startups at Amazon Web Services. He's a partner at the Silicon Valley Defense Group, National Security Entrepreneur in Residence at University of California in San Diego, advisor at the USC Center for Research in Space Technology, and co-chair of the Berkeley Skydeck Air and Space Track. Prior to working in tech, Mike served in the US government for over a decade. He was a case officer in the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, and has held positions in the Department of Defense and Department of State, as well as teaching at the FBI Academy. Mike, welcome to the Future Space.
Thank you, Daniel. I really appreciate you having me here. It's great to see you again.
And before we get into our conversation, I just want to clear case officer for CIA. Does that mean on the field, behind a desk?
Well, there's probably more behind the desk than I really ever wanted, because case officers do write a lot. But yeah, they are the ones that are operations officers. They're in the field, overseas. They spend 75% or more of their career outside of the United States. And their job is to recruit sources of intelligence. So finding folks, spotting, assessing them to help steal secrets and learn a lot that the United States and their allies needs.
Well, I can't wait to hear how you went from that and taking your skills from the CIA and to space today. But before we get there, I always ask the same two questions to all my guests because I really want to focus about space, moving space from being a destination to either a set of values or what does it mean to the human story. So for you, could you share three words that capture the essence of space?
Yeah, so Daniel, when we first met, like a couple of years back, it was in Austin at South by Southwest. It was actually on the margins of a space startup pitch competition, and you asked me this question, and I didn't answer at the time, but I've been thinking about it ever since, and I feel like I don't want to give the wrong answer here, but I know that there's no wrong answer, and so for me, it's linear, and all I can think about when I think of space is our next adventure, and those are my three words. Because for me, I'm sure that's not very original, but I'm always looking for good stories and I'm always looking for adventure. And I feel like I cannot think of another place that is more exciting and more ripe for adventure than space. So those are my words.
And that's the perfect segue because you just said the next story. And on those lines, right, we know that there's a science story of going to space. We know that there's a technology story of going to space. There's the geopolitics. There's a lot of stories. But if I say, what is the human story of going to space? What does it mean to you?
For me, I think that humans, we are hardwired to always look over the next hill and to always push ourselves. And technology has aided that exploration and has aided and supported our hunger for learning, but it's not the only part of the story, and certainly it's not like when we think about space and the space industry and like humans going to space. For me, what I think about a lot as a guy that never studied engineering for a living, there are a lot of roles to be filled in space exploration and in this next chapter of humanity. So the human story is we're going to space, and a lot of very smart engineers and scientists and hard tech professionals have been getting us there for the last 50, 60 years. But it's time for everyone else to jump on board and get involved. And that's why this is so exciting for me right now.
Little kind of philosophical question or tie into this, but because you said there was like it's in our genes, this desire to look over beyond the horizon. Would you even kind of bring it to life ever since the beginning, right? I mean, for how life got to this point was all by always pushing the boundaries, right? How did it go from these little bacteria to where we are today. And but species have always developed, they adapt so that they can move with the food, they can adapt with their environments. And humans are using technology. We're just continuing that story, right? We're developing these technologies so that we can adapt in reaching these new destinations, whether it was building a ship that can take us across the pond or across the ocean, or planes, but now we're talking about space. This is in like if we really we look into the core of it, is it the same or is it different and different?
I mean, I think you can be, I would rather be philosophical than intellectual about this. And I think we could probably make the argument that, like, when you're faced with a resource constrained environment and you either adapt or die, that, like, this is why it's a certain point that prehistoric fish that had something that looked like arms actually crawled out of the muddy water and found land. Like, that's kind of where we came from. And I think there's an argument that they were probably looking for resources. But I really do believe that this aspect of humankind drives us where we, like, maybe it's genetically linked, but like we do need to explore, and we have this insatiable thirst for new environments. So yeah, like things are getting tough on Earth, and yes, arguably, and by some many measures, we're running out of resources, or we are in a resource constrained environment. And there's a lot of argument to be made that making humankind a multiplanetary species is the next step for us and our survivability. But again, like, it's also just really exciting. It's really fun to turn that corner and to go someplace new. This is going to be maybe a really silly example, but did you ever play? I don't know if you play video games, but did you ever play World of Warcraft? I'm sorry, not World of Warcraft. Warcraft, the original Warcraft video games, or StarCraft. Did you ever play those? Okay, well, you're an adventurer, you're an explorer, Daniel. So I'm gonna give you this example. In the original Warcraft and StarCraft games, right, where you have to, like, you have these little guys and you have to collect resources. These are like real time, like, resource management games, and then you have to fight for them, right? Well, there was this thing called the Fog of War. You start every game, and you're this little figure on a map, and all you see is what's around you, right? Like on your screen. And then you move a little bit, and then that clears the map, right? So now you've now expanded the map. And then your whole sort of goal, like, intuitively, we want to clear the entire map, right? So that we see what's there. And one thing that happens, and this is the fog of war aspect, is when you back up a little bit, the map still stays cleared, but it's kind of grayed out a little bit. So you don't see these real-time updates, but you know what's out there. And so in my mind, and this is just, 12-year-old me still thinking in an adult's body, like, we're always clearing that map. And that's what we always want to be doing. That's the human story of space.
We are, I think, genetically we're wired to see the end of something, whether it's the end of a rhythm or music, or I mean, that's one of the reasons why we binge Netflix, is because once we're at the end of the episode and then they show us that little kind of great, the continuation of the story, we went, well, I want to see what's going to happen. If it's a hard no, then it would go, okay, it's not going over there. Let me go to some other place. But this idea that, like, for everything that our senses are able to capture, if there's something else beyond that we can kind of grasp the continuation, we want to figure out how to get there. So if it's over beyond, over the horizon, beyond the mountain or space, and then after that, there's just a question to figure out the technology that allows us to get there.
Yeah. And I feel like we are rapidly changing our perspective on space. I got two young kids, and by the time they're grown up, I really do think they're going to be thinking about low Earth orbit and probably the moon in a way that we think about a trip. I live in San Diego, probably about a trip to, like, Santa Barbara, approximately. Like, if I pointed my car straight up and somehow managed to drive to the ISS, it would take me about just as long to get there as it would to get to, well, with traffic, some points in LA. You know what I mean? And we just don't think about space like that right now. But I think that's going to change quickly. A lot of things are happening in the next few years, as you know, right? Like, intuitive machines just landed on the moon. We have Artemis 2 and 3 coming up in the next 2 years. We're going to put humans back on the moon. And I think we're going to be thinking about space like we think about the maritime environment, right? Like it's not, it's another platform for us to explore.
That will come at the benefit of obviously everyone. I mean, I was even reading the Ed Conaway, writer for, I think the Times, is coming out with a new book called Material World, where he talks about these six materials that are really at the foundation of everything that we do, from lithium to sand to iron. But his point was that even even with their vision of a green future where things are not going to be based on fossil fuel or things are going to be green, the amount of material that is needed to build that future cannot just come from Earth. If it comes from Earth, we're going to run into the exact same issues of extractions and conflicts. It has to come from somewhere else. And the quantities also that we're looking for. And there's only one place that we can look for that, that's going to be space. So, I mean, whether we want it or not, space has to be part of the solution, right?
I totally agree. But I have a question. Can I ask you a question? Because this is your podcast, but like I'm so interested. I mean, one of the things that fascinates me about you is that I literally have described you as an adventurer, an explorer. Like you are a modern day explorer, and we're here talking about space, and this is how we met. But like, you spend a lot of time exploring the earth and particularly the oceans. So I don't want to distract us too much, but I just am curious to hear, like, how do you tie these two things together? Because I do think that there's some thread here, and I really would love to hear your perspective on it.
My journey into space is really kind of out of the left field. Like I would have never expected, and even just 5 years ago, if you had asked me about space, I'm like, great, great for science fiction, but I don't think that this is where we have to go. And my my Apollo moment, that day that my brain saw things differently, was the day that I saw the two rockets from SpaceX landing upright. Right when I saw that, still
I remember
goosebumps.
exactly
Like
where I
you're
was.
looking
That
at
was awesome.
something that should not happen. Right, your brain is like think that you're watching something in reverse. You can't process what's happening. But in that moment, I had this moment of realization that space to that point had just been a fantasy of technology, something that we're not going to have, that we're not going to even remotely touch, or even if we can, the scale of it is way too big. But in that moment, I realized that this was just the continuation of everything that life has been leading up to. Like if you put yourself, and not that I want to personify life and nature or even the planet. I don't believe that the planet is an entity, with a conscious, like it's an ecosystem of its own that is driven by certain principles and rules. But if you're looking at the forces of life, which has been increasing in complexity over billions of years, it would be a shame to be limited on this tiny speck in the entire universe. Like put all this effort for all these years only to disappear at the end when there's an entirety of the universe. So from a strategy of survival, life is growing in complexity, figuring out how to adapt and evolve until it reaches the limit of its planet. And now you have forces, and you have the luck of the draw, you have the right characteristics that allows one species for the first time to take that life and continue that life story. And I realized at that moment that there was a nature story that needed to be told to connect the dot between where we're going and where everything started. And then we're that piece that is able to offer that gift, right? We ourselves, we're insignificant really in the big scheme of things, but at the same time, we're extremely significant because we're the only species that is able right now to take this continuation of something that has been billions of years in process, and we can assure it the continuation for billions of more because now we have different options. So that's how I connected. I went from solo wilderness explorer to we need to tell a story, a different story for space, and we need to tell it about the human and nature and life. So does that, Michael?
No, I mean, I am genuinely glad that you're doing it because folks need to tell this story. And for me, it makes total sense. again, it's the next chapter in human evolution, and we're just getting started, and this is where we need to go. And for me, in undergrad, I majored in organizational studies because it's the study of complex human systems. For most of my early career, I was a CIA case officer, which is really about building long-term trusted relationships with human beings and understanding people. And the next step in my career was, I've worked with a bunch of deep tech startups and like done a lot around frontier technology, but really it's kind of the bulk of it is pointing towards space because this is the human adventure that we're on. And it makes total sense what you're doing and why you're here.
Thank you.
I can't wait to see the pictures too, by the way, from you in space.
Me too. Me too. I mean, I was talking to William Shatner because we're taking him to Antarctica, but when he went up to space, Shatner was this poet, this person who had been primed all his life to really capture the essence of what it is, to go up. And he comes down and he's super emotional. And I think that's the purpose. Like you send Jeff Bezos, he's an engineer, his mind is in different places, like he processes the information differently. When they sent their, what's his name? One of their original engineers, and he went up and he came down and he could not process. You could see that his brain was not capable of connecting the dots because it was such an emotional, visceral experience.
It was amazing to see that, by the way. And I watched that live, and I remember watching Shatner walk out that hatch and the look on his face, and it was just so profound, and I couldn't imagine. And by the way, like, he is the person whose voice is in my head. When my three words were our next adventure, and all I can really hear is space, the final frontier. It's really, and I was raised on Star Trek and original series and Next Generation, and so to see him with that reaction, and then also to read what he wrote afterwards, it's incredible. And there's a little bit of part, and I actually want your opinion on this. Like, I read something that he wrote that was actually kind of sad. When you see, there's this famous Sagan quote, which, basically says like, everything that we've always experienced and ever will experience is in that tiny little dot. And Shatner wrote something similar, like it's almost like sad seeing all of that in one place, but just very profound. Like, it really makes me want to live a very full life and to push out that map as far as I can and to experience the full breadth of the human experience.
Do you think it's actually a common thread within the space industry? One of, like, you were asking me about my background from the nature, environmental world to now the space. And one of the things that I find extremely refreshing is that in the space industry, there's a collective inspiration, desire to fix things. Everybody's motivated to find solution, to go beyond, to push the boundaries. They all kind of pointing the finger forward, looking forward. And then there's certain sectors who have created a really, I would say, negative story about our species, and almost kind of like trying to think that there's a point in their past where everything worked perfectly, and if we could go back into that past, things would magically be better. But the world of space, I find it like they see space as a solution. They're trying to find they're trying to find these solutions that will help the planet. Do you find that in the space industry, this kind of inspiration, this motivation that I find contagious?
The short answer is yes, and I'm going to give a longer answer. But I want to say I think this is fascinating, what you said about going back to a time where our experience or life on Earth was better, because I feel like I'm not sure what I think about that. So let me think while I'm speaking, and then we'll come back to that. But yeah, absolutely. I grew up professionally in a very mission-focused environment, and I was fortunate enough to have a career where I knew exactly why I was getting out of bed in the morning. And, Usually when I showed up to work, folks to my left and my right were all facing the same direction. And it wasn't about the money. It certainly wasn't about the fame or the public accolades. It was about the mission. And okay, so like I got out of government in 2016. I had a little bit of a walkabout trying to find myself and figure out where I wanted to be next in life. And this is why I absolutely love the space community, both commercial and government, around the world, is because you walk the floor. One, it's a small community. Okay, it just is. Like, you walk the floor at Space Symposium and Satellite and Amos and South by Southwest where we met. Like, you kind of, for the most part, you see a lot of very familiar faces. And there are new ones every year, which is a great part of this story. But it's a small, tight-knit community. So you can get to know folks relatively quickly. And more so, I mentioned that I work with a lot of startups across sectors. Space startups in particular are really collaborative. In the space industry, legacy incumbent aerospace companies, very collaborative. And there is this sense that it is not zero sum. It's not zero sum, that we can grow the pie for everyone, and we're all doing this for the collective good of mankind. For the collective good of humankind. And look, every business has to survive, and at a certain point we compete. But in space, more than any other place that I've worked, there is tons of room for collaboration. And that's why I really love it. It is mission focused. It's absolutely mission focused. Whether, there's some, are we going to Leo? Are we going to the moon? Are we going to Mars? Are you building a commercial? Like whatever, everyone has their little piece of that, but they're all facing and rowing in the same direction.
Yeah, I find that attitude really motivating. I was having a conversation, and we're talking about, back in the days of Shackleton and these explorers, ocean exploration, how there was a certain excitement from the public following these explorers. They're pushing the boundaries, reaching these places that seem so distant and wild for the public. And when they came back, everybody was like, oh my God, tell us about these places. Today, the scene is really different. We see our sense of exploration as a conduit to go and mess up other places where the humans are the stain on the wilderness. And there's almost kind of from the public perspective, like this anti-exploration. Do not go to Antarctica. Do not go to the moon. Do not go to space. Why do we want to go over there and mess things up and pollute it in the same way that we did it over there? So there's a need, first of all, to change the narrative about who we are as a species, but also to kind of a PR mission to reshape exploration as, yes, we're going with the desire to be better, but we have to go, right?
Yeah, that is fascinating. And I hadn't thought about it like this, but I often lament the fact, and I'm almost sure that I'm wrong about this, and let me know what you think, but I lament the fact that there aren't that many undiscovered or unexplored places on this earth. Right? I think about that, would I have been happier in an earlier time when I could get on a steamship and go someplace for the first time and walk into a jungle and get lost and know that I was the first person ever to go there, because that's how I'm wired, right? I get most excited on the boundaries, on the edge, and pushing that map out. I don't think there are a lot of places like that left on this earth. And so I think that we as a species, I think that we're very protective about that idea, about new frontiers. And so I think that's also why, kind of then conversely, there's this backlash against exploration, against going to the Antarctic and leaving trash in the desert, right? This really depresses me when I go to places that should be pristine nature, or frankly, when I'm walking in a canyon trail in San Diego and I hear someone playing a Bluetooth speaker, right? It hurts me, because this is pristine nature, and it should be cherished and protected. But it's like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, right? We cannot observe something without impacting it. And so by our very act of exploration, we are polluting that environment. So yeah, there's a backlash, and maybe I think that's why we can channel some energy into responsible exploration. And that's probably something you spend more time thinking about than I do, but like there is a way to do things more sustainably than not.
I've always understood the complexity of that relationship between the the technology gains that our society receive, but also the what is taken away. Right? We today, if I want to go experience Asia, I can just jump on the plane and go and experience Asia. Great benefit for me because I don't need to invest 6 months into taking a ship and all that. Like the availability of it, but the problem, the consequence with that is that it's also available for everybody around the world, and now everything is easier. So it's the technology. Like I know that like a lot of people look into the past with nostalgia and they're really happy, but they're looking at it with all the benefits that we've acquired. Right? No one in their right mind would want to go back 50, 75 years, 100 years ago with exactly the way it was, where health-wise, you were at the mercy of many, things. You didn't have your cell phone. You could not connect with your family, and having a tooth abscess might mean that you die tomorrow, right? So you cannot dissociate the gains without the consequences. And ultimately, hopefully, we get to move forward by recognizing these things that need to protect, that need to cherish. And you look at the Americas at the beginning when Roosevelt created those national parks. There were no other places in the world that had national parks. Now there are national parks everywhere. But the idea of protecting these places so people can access them came from here, right? So now it's everywhere. But as we move forward, and that's the thing that like we need to go back to, is every time we move forward to these new places, we always try to do it better than what we've done before, right? When the kids leave the house, they try to be better than their parents. Their kids will want to be better than them. But everybody is always trying to do the best with the tools and the knowledge that they have. And you can't judge the past from our perspective in the same way that we don't want the future to judge us in the same way, because we're going to tell them, well, listen, that's all we knew. But from the future, they can look back and they're going to say, well, you guys were so simple. It was just this or it was just that. So having that kind of humility to accept that complexity and try to do better rather than trying to find others to blame because it's hard, right? It's hard to make always the right decisions because we need to make mistakes to know which of these decisions are mistakes or right.
Yeah, like my mom definitely always told me, leave this world a better place than it was when you came into it. And I have taken that very seriously. I'm doing everything I can to do what she asked me to do. And I think there's kind of this unavoidable equilibrium around progress in technology and humankind that, like, for example, this might be a silly example, but where you grew up, Donna, where'd you grow up?
In Quebec.
In Quebec. Okay. So were there places in Quebec that you and your friends knew about that were kind of like secret places to explore and go, I don't know, hike or whatever? In San Diego, I grew up in San Diego and then I did this career overseas. And now I'm back here, right? When I grew up, there were these urban legends, and there was one place, for example, called the Mushroom Caves, and everyone would talk about the Mushroom Caves, and like you had to know someone who told you, like someone's older brother or sister, and then you would get these, bad directions and try to go find it, and if you found it, you got really excited. And now it's literally on Google Maps. Like I can go on Google Maps and type Mushroom Caves and then just take my kids there, right? Like, well, good, because I never found them when I was a kid. I had no idea, and I would never have remembered them or found them. And now I'm driving down on 5 South, and I see the Mushroom Caves off to my left. I'm like, wait, this was the big mystery of my childhood. And that's just an example, like many other things like that, right? That have just totally transformed, and some of the magic is gone, and I'm sad about that. But it's also pretty convenient. And this is what I mean by this unescapable or inescapable equilibrium. Like, you just live with it. And okay, this is like how life is, and I'm not going to capture that magic, but there's certainly other magic out there to go look for. And I think you can argue like the pros and the cons and of modern technology, but it's something that I think any tool that comes along, we just do our best to harness it for good and to make the world a better place. And I guess next the moon and Mars.
It's the like even the every time I go into the forest, right? I'm extremely cognizant that I'm driving on logging companies road, right? They're the ones who have invested to create those roads, because that would have not been the government, that would have not been any, because that's not usually, it's not the outdoor people that fund those things. It's either the hunters or the logging company or the mining company, and then we use we use those outlets. Tourism, the same thing. There's always a fine line between the money that is needed to protect those places, but then you need the tourism to visit those places. Um, hunters, hunters are 60% of the conservation funds comes from hunting. So it's easy to kind of make these things really simple, but at the same time, there is a complexity, and we're talking about Antarctica. Yes, now you can access Antarctica, where before it meant that you were a hardcore explorer and you were willing to die in the process, and now you can go, for the holidays, and like we're going to be doing right now, taking astronaut Scott Kelly and William Shatner, and we're going to be down there, and you can stream Netflix. And I was having when I was
That's
down
amazing.
when I was down there, I was having Zoom meetings with Shatner in the Zodiac, right next to the ship, in Antarctica, because of Starlink. And there is a certain awareness and sadness of realizing that now you can be connected everywhere. But at the same time, I've seen so many families sharing these moments with their children, with the rest of their families, and now and seeing through their eyes and through their what they say, experiencing and really experiencing the connecting how everything is connected, right? Because for them, prior to that, they were not able to understand how is it that Antarctica is connected to what happens in New York or what happens everywhere. But now, being seeing that, they get to experience it. They get to see how the dots are connected, because there's an expedition team that does the educational part of it. And now they go back and they become ambassador to these places and say, no, we have to protect. So that's the unfortunate, all these different perspectives that come together moving forward.
Yeah, I was just thinking about this the other day because I saw a picture, or it was a video actually, of someone was filming themselves summiting Everest, and they sort of did a shot over their shoulder, and there was a line of like like 100 people behind them. I mean, it was basically shoulder to shoulder, folks just walking up, and I thought, is nothing sacred? Like, this is amazing, right? I can only dream of summiting Everest in my life, but when I was a kid growing up, this was the pinnacle, literally, of adventure, right? And like a really hard thing, and it's still a very hard thing, but this is an immense challenge that very few people on Earth had done, and now it's almost like it appears, and I'll probably offend someone here, but it appears to be commoditized, right? If you can get a line this long of folks walking up to the peak of Everest, and I don't know, like, that's great. I mean, I don't have really strong feelings about it, but a little part of me is kind of sad, and I don't know why
Well, you will
about
not
that.
find me that in that line. That's like, yeah. My
I'm
the
surprised.
Oh no, it's that takes away everything for like there's a spectrum of experiences, and for me, the idea of being on the line, going up, I don't do line
Okay, so that's it. It's not about going up Everest. It's about being in line. It's
being in
like with
line,
all of those people. Okay, I get it. Yep, totally,
being
totally.
in line.
You want to find that thing where you're the only one that in sight, where the only one you can see.
Or very few, right? There needs to be a certain sense of, it's you've made a choice, and there's a small collective of a group. But then if you're in the line, listen. I'm the kind of person who, if I drive down a freeway and I see a group of cars that are photographing an animal, I continue. Like for me, this is not my experience. This is not how I want to photograph. I don't want to consume these moments of that in that way. I want the camera to be the witness into a moment that I'm experiencing. I just don't want to capture something just because it's there, right? So that's but that's me.
Maybe all of us explorers are just introverts. Really, that's what maybe all it is. We're just looking for some to be alone or with very few people. But you know what I think is interesting actually? Some of my favorite pictures that I've taken are if I like let's just take that scenario. I'm never interested in the bison or whatever. What I love to take a picture of is all of the people taking a picture, right? Like those are my favorite pictures just because this is the human experience that I really still love to see. Like what is everyone looking at? What is everyone fascinated by? And that I think is still a good picture.
Now back to so you were a CIA, government, FBI, a lot of people dealing with people, studying people, and then you're in space. Was space always the objective, and then the industry kind of like became available, and then you went into it, or did you just end up in space and originally were just having a career from on the governmental agencies?
That's a really good question. It was definitely intentional. I think you like we're in this funny generation that I think will look back in history that we're in the 50-year gap of presence on the moon for humanity, where like I grew up watching tons of movies and reading books and watching TV shows about going to space, but we weren't okay. We're in Leo, but not on the moon, and so I have been a space nerd ever since I was a little kid. I grew up on science fiction. Like most of my leadership philosophy originally came from Star Trek: The Next Generation and everything that I read in like science fiction books. And so I was a space nerd, and I was raised on this. And but I didn't go to school for engineering or I went to school for some like very social sciencey human type studies, and then ended up in a career that was very human focused, probably because that's what I'm naturally best at, right? But when I got out in 2016, I knew absolutely that I wanted to re-engage that part of my brain and pursue a career in tech. And very specifically, I was actually one of my first startups was in clean tech. We were doing electric vehicle infrastructure, so I wanted to find ways that I could help the world. But I also knew that I wanted to be in space, working in space somehow. And so I had some friends at SpaceX at the time. Again, this is like somewhat early, but they'd still done a lot. Looked at jobs there. It was kind of weird because, again, I was a CIA case officer. I was still undercover at the time, so I couldn't say what I did. But my skill set on paper did not translate necessarily to a job at SpaceX. I don't know, maybe in sales or business development. But I knew that I wanted to be in space. And so I just kept looking around, and I did a couple of startups. I came back home to San Diego, and there happened to be a really cool company based in Carlsbad in San Diego called Viasat, and Viasat makes geostationary orbit satellites. They do broadband internet. They've been doing it for almost 40 years now. So they do residential internet. They do the broadband satellite internet for Air Force One and tactical SATCOM for the warfighter. So they are very much a space company. Half of their revenue came from consumer products, and half of their revenue comes from government. So it just happened to be that I found a really cool team doing market intelligence and strategy where they actually valued my background, and that was my like little open door into the space industry, and I just ran through it as quickly as possible because I wanted to be in space. And while I was there, I talked to every engineer that I could. I just soaked up everything that I could and talked to as many people, and I really wanted to be a space guy and tried to sort of turn this corner from my previous government, very kind of like defense, intelligence, national security career into, I don't want to turn my back on that. It's a big part of me and who I am, but I really want to grow and be part of this movement into space. And so that's what Viasat did for me. And I ended up going from there to a team at Amazon Web Services that needed folks who understood the experience of founders and startups, the experience of investors who care about, who are investing in startups, VCs. And I had done some investing and advised VCs at the time. And then obviously the experience of government customers and public sector. And so that's how I ended up at AWS. And my job there was specifically to help space and national security VCs and startups. So by that point, I was like, okay, I'm relatively established. I created, along with some teammates, this thing called the AWS Space Accelerator, which we ran for 3 years. And I think that helped out a lot of startups. And it really did make a mark on the space community. And that gave me this phenomenal opportunity to go to all of these conferences, meet folks, learn as much as I could, and occasionally share my opinions on the space industry. But I still feel very new in this world.
So you have a big part of your career was into dealing with I would say the geopolitics reality of how the world, the intricate kind of network under that we take for granted and we don't see. I mean, we see on TV, but in reality, there's a lot of people, skills, and negotiations that happen around the world to make sure that all this stays relatively peace and moving forward. I think the space for a long time. I mean, after the space race, where again it was more geopolitics, and then the gap was because basically the technology was not there to fill that gap, right? There was no incentive for the commercial, and it was too expensive for the government, so they had to find these solutions that would have no solution, so that you could keep the money coming from the Congress. And now we have an industry that so far has been more technology driven and science driven, but the reality, the complexity of what's happening on Earth now is going to space, and it's not going to be easy, right? There's Russia, China. There's a lot of. I mean, the Artemis Accord is only signed by 30-something countries, which is a big difference from the Space Accord back in the 60s. How do you see that future? And is there anything that keeps you up at night, understanding all the players, or?
Well, let me just say, I genuinely aspire to be a citizen of the world, and I think that humans are inherently good. And I asked this question when I was a kid in high school. We had this kind of like philosophy class called the Falconer. And one day at lunch, we sat around a table and had this question: are humans inherently good or bad? And a lot of us argued that we're inherently good, right? Like, you want to see the best side of people. And the person leading the conversation said, okay, well, now let's fast forward you all 3 weeks and you haven't eaten and you're starving. And someone puts a piece of bread in the center of the table. Does that change? And I still don't believe that the answer to that question changes. But I think that some people are going to die. I think that they're going to fight for that piece of bread. And that is I'm also a pragmatist. I'm a realist. And that's the unfortunate truth. Again, we go back to like limited resources. And this is, this is one of the causes of human conflict. And so if I'm wearing my former CIA officer hat, for example, the Cold War never ended. In the dark corners of the earth, certain folks employed by the governments of their countries have been fighting each other nonstop. And that never went away. While at the same time, in space, there's then been this incredible collaboration, right? In science, when scientists collaborate across borders and share data and share findings and co-publish papers, right? Like, those two worlds have been living in parallel. And space, up until right about now, has been what we would call an uncontested domain. We haven't been fighting in space, thank goodness. Well, I hate to say it, but a lot more folks are heading up there, and it's going to be a little bit more crowded. And I almost don't even want to manifest this. Like, I don't want to say this out loud, but it's going to change at some point, right? Like, we're all going to land on the moon, and people are going to put their flags down, and they're going to start arguing about who gets to mine that rock. You know, like, and this is why I joke about, have you watched For All Mankind? The series? Yeah, like, this is why I call that a historical documentary. For All Mankind is this alternative history where Russia beat the US to the moon. And then this kicked off this space race of like who can colonize first. And then very quickly it gets to this question of, and I love this debate between the DoD and NASA on the show of like, should we bring weapons to the moon? And should we weaponize what is historically been a research mission? And it makes for fun TV, but I guarantee you, and I don't actually know, I haven't been part of these conversations, I guarantee you this is being discussed right now. And I asked a friend of mine, I think I wrote this publicly recently. A friend of mine has a company that's putting some rovers on the moon. And I asked him, hey, how long do you think it's going to be until people ask you to weaponize those rovers? And he laughed and he said, sooner than you think, Mike, which is kind of chilling. And by the way, this was in 2021 that we had this conversation, you know, so it's coming. And I wish that it weren't, but it's something that, okay. And by the way, like, this is why space exploration is no longer the province of only engineers. We really need public policy, international relations, international security policy, philosophers, artists. Like, lots of people should be weighing in on this conversation about how do we make a better version of humanity. And if there is any way possible that we can avoid the conflicts that we have historically waged on Earth, we should do our best to find that on the moon and beyond.
And the way to do that is by not being naive to thinking that space is just going to be, you know, an utopia where we can all go and everything is going to be fine because it's this story that we've created. In reality, it's a place where we have to anticipate conflicts so that we can prepare ourselves. Right? We can come to the table. It's like going to a different country and sitting at the table, not studying and not understanding the different culture. There's going to be a failure of communication. So as we go to the moon, as we go to, I mean, right now China has his own space station and they have their own agenda. And Russia, I'm not too sure if they're going to ever succeed in getting to that next phase. But they also, you know, what Putin is doing, they're trying to drive their own narrative. So we have to be honest and humble into what this next step is going to be so that we can give ourselves the skills, so that we can come to the table with that humility and that openness, and so that we can drive that conversation and make that happen. Because otherwise, if we don't, and that's for me, that's another point, if we don't try to be the first to go to these places, then others will go there before us, and then they will shape it into a way that might not be necessarily in the way that, you know, we like it. So just for that. So, Mike, I think you have a career of skill sets that is really about studying human nature and all its up and down, and good sides, dark sides. What would like try to capture that in 3 words? 3 words of wisdom about living a life full. I mean, you kind of mentioned a little bit, a few of them for what your parents have taught you. But what would be 3 words of wisdom by Mike?
Okay, I'm not gonna. I'm gonna go. I'm gonna interpret that as 3 pieces of advice or wisdom. So I can't boil this down to 3 individual words. I don't think it would do it justice. And I'm passing on things that, well, in one of these cases, it's something that my dad told me from a very young age, and in fact, he told me it again today when I spent some time with him. And this is a little bit more personal, but it's find what you're good at and do it. You know, and it's this question of like, what should I do with my life? what is my purpose? Why are we here? And when I asked my dad, my dad had like a very successful career in medicine. He was a heart surgeon for 40 years. He saved a lot of lives. And I've always really looked up to him. He came from very humble background in, a little town in Mexico with 9 brothers. And every time I've asked him, like, Dad, what should I do? He said, well, just find out what you're good at and go for it. And so for me, that is a North Star and a piece of wisdom that's always kept me, I think, headed generally in the right direction. Do what you're good at. And then everything else seems easy. I guess that's the big point, right? Like if you're doing what you're good at, it doesn't seem like work and it's easy and it should be fun. The other one that can be interpreted like maybe a little bit more cynically, but I think this is helpful advice, comes from him too, from the world of heart surgery. It's all bleeding stops eventually. And the way that I think about this is, and it comes from a story of his where he had a patient on the table like very early on in his career, and he was getting really stressed out because they were bleeding internally. And his instructor, his lead surgeon, took him out and said, look, all bleeding stops eventually. Like, just don't worry too much, because either you're going to stop it, you're going to do something about it and solve this problem, or you're not. But one way or another, this problem's going to go away. So just don't stress out about it too much in the meantime, and you're probably going to be a little bit more effective at solving it. And then the third one for me is, this is the only one of these 3 that I came up with on my own. It's more of like a life philosophy. When I was young, and the first time I went to Iraq, I was like 21 years old. It was, early on, it was 2004. And I didn't really know what I was doing. I was at war for the first time, and I had a lot of thoughts going on about what I was doing and what I was seeing. And I didn't always know like how to think and how to feel about what was going on. And what I realized was that the only thing that really made sense to me in the face of all this complexity is just to love everybody. And that has to be my default state, because there are really bad things going on in the world, and there are really bad people, and there are people that will try to hurt you or take the bread from the center of the table. And a lot of times I can overthink it, but if I just remember, what, I'm just going to love everybody and start there, this gives me a place to begin the conversation and to begin the thought. And so those are my 3 words of wisdom, a lot more than 3, but really important to me.
Very wise and very, absolutely. And I agree with you. If you choose to see the good in life, you will see plenty of it everywhere. Despite the fact that there's a lot of bad, but ultimately there are billions of people who wake up every morning trying to do the right thing. And the ones who often don't do the right thing is because they have their own pain and suffering that, drives them to that place. And there's more sadness than anger. But
yeah. And we're all human, and we are desperate for connection. Like we are a tribal, interconnected species, and this is what we want. And this is why, when you're in these crazy, austere environments, and you're out on the edge, and I was recruiting terrorists for the CIA. Like, what you need to find in people is that one little thing that you can connect with them on, and like that's what keeps you going, no matter who it is, no matter where you are.
And now, right now, Mike, if people want to see where you're going to be, or are you in San Diego? I know you're in LinkedIn. You're pretty active on LinkedIn. You're going to be at Austin for South by Southwest. But if they're interested in reaching out, they can just do so on LinkedIn, correct?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn. The place where I spend, of the 3 of those things, the place where I spend most of my time is LinkedIn. So yeah.
So we'll make sure we have all the links in the description, and I'm pretty sure that your door is wide open for anyone who wants to.
Yeah, absolutely. I love meeting new people.
Mike, it's always a pleasure. I look forward for next time either in San Diego, not in Austin at South by Southwest this time, but there's going to be another time.
Yeah, or maybe on a ship somewhere. Who knows?
Cross fingers.
All right. Hey, thanks so much. I really appreciate doing this.
Always a pleasure.
Good to see you. All right. Thanks, Daniel.